Good afternoon. The Committee on Finance is called to order. As you can see, I'm not Tom Prendergast, but I'll be, or maybe you can't see, but I'll be conducting the meeting until he returns. Are there any members of the public wishing to speak?
Yes, sir. We have one public speaker, Murray Bowden.
Morning, afternoon. At the Metro North meeting this morning, they started without me because they didn't let me come upstairs for whatever reason. A lot of people knew I was here, and a lot of people knew I wanted to speak. Completely against the law to start a meeting where the public is not permitted to be there. So when they told me that my time was up, I said, "You don't follow the rules? I don't have to follow the rules." And I kept speaking to make my point. Well, I was taken out by two detectives. And what most of you don't know is that I was arrested once before at an MTA meeting on Madison Avenue. Handcuffed, perp walked through Grand Central Station. I was released and finally got upstairs to the meeting, but I went before the judge sometime later, and the judge was very good because he used certain cases as a teaching platform. Went over my case very, very thoroughly, knew everything about it because I'd sent him all the information. And he said, "Mr. Bowden, case dismissed." And then he added, "Mr. Bowden, we need more people like you. Please continue to do what you're doing." So essentially what I did here this morning was under the direction of a New York City judge. There needs to be some changes. Jim Simpson used to be here on the board at one time. He became commissioner of New York Transportation, New Jersey, and the commissioner of the New Jersey Transit. When he ran the New Jersey Transit meetings and somebody had a question, he would say, "Okay, would you answer somebody's question?" And why can't we do that here? I've been asking questions that have been ignored, and at your North meeting primarily. Why can't somebody ask a question and it be answered right here at the board? The chairman has the ability, using Robert's Rules of Order, saying this.
Mr. Bowden, could you conclude your remarks, please?
I'm sorry, who said that?
Can you conclude your remarks? Your time is expired.
Yes, I'll conclude my remarks. I have a lot of other things, but I can drop them. I think that you need to think about changing the format so that when a speaker of the public asks a question, that if it's reasonable and within the parameters of the chairman's discretion, that it be answered right then and there on the spot. By the way, I couldn't see this morning, and I asked for a better view, and they've given me something to stand on, so if there were a lot of people there, I could see you. That was a problem this morning. Thank you.
Thank you.
Since I presume that concludes our public speakers, may I have a motion to approve the minutes of the last meeting? Second. All in favor? Mr. Johnson, are there any changes to the work plan?
No changes to the work plan.
And since Budget Watch presentation won't be presented, I'll ask Bob Foran to present the financial plan.
Mr. Chairman, Vice Chairman, we'll be presenting the financial plan at a combined finance and board meeting on Wednesday. There is no Budget Watch this month because typically we do not present the Budget Watch when we do have the financial plan being presented. So next
we have Finance.
Finance Watch is next, yeah.
Good afternoon.
Olga Chernat is here representing Finance in place of Pat McCoy.
Good afternoon. My name is Olga Chernat. I'm a Deputy Director of Finance, and I would be happy to walk you through Finance Watch this month. As always, in Finance Watch, we report activities that occurred since our previous meeting last month. And in the Finance Watch, which starts on page 20 of your book, We report issuance of $700 million of dedicated tax fund bond anticipation notes, Series 2016A. They were sold on a competitive basis, as we typically sell our bonds, and we had 15 winning bidders for our bonds, which resulted in 0.6% all-in true interest cost. Also, in the Finance Watch this month is our issuance of Series 2016B transportation revenue bonds for refunding purposes. This transaction resulted in present value savings of $138 million, which is 18% of the refunded bonds. This transaction was led by the joint venture of Seabird Brankford Schenck and Morgan Stanley. And that's MWB joint venture, and the special co-senior managers were Stern Brothers, a women-owned firm, and Academy Securities, a service-disabled veteran-owned firm. We also reporting on our ongoing fuel hedging program. In June, we executed another layer of the fuel hedging, which resulted in all-in price of $1.65 per gallon. The winning bidder was Goldman Sachs through its J. Aaron venture. On our upcoming transactions, we'll be happy to report in September. As part of the Finance Watch, I also wanted to get back to Mr. Modler, who at the time of our June meeting had a question about all-in cost for our auction rate bonds. We have two types of auction rate bonds. We have transportation revenue bonds in auction rate mode, and we also have certificates of participation also in auction rate mode. And on all-in cost basis, since inception, transportation revenue auction bonds resulted in 1.3% all-in cost, and certificates of participation in 1.6% all-in cost, which is, to put it in a context, roughly comparable to the all-in cost of other variable rate type of bonds in our portfolio, such as variable rate demand bonds or floating rate notes. Are there any questions on the Finance Watch?
Any questions? Have you concluded your report?
Okay, next we're going to move to MTA headquarter and all agency items. There are two action items. One is a walk-in, but I'm going to first talk about the one that's in your book, that being the Commuter Rail Amtrak agreement. This was presented as an information at both the Metro-North and Long Island Committee meetings this morning. We are seeking to obtain board approval of modifications to various agreements between MTA and each of its commuter railroads and the National Railroad Passenger Corporation, known as Amtrak, necessary to comply with the requirements of the Federal Passenger Rail Investment and Improvement Act of 2008 and the implementing policies adopted by the Northeast Corridor Commission. We need a motion.
Could you, yes, I'd like to, is there a motion and a second? Would you please summarize the provisions of that change in the agreement?
Bill Wheeler here is going to describe that.
Good.
Good morning. The purpose of the PREA Act, as we call it, is to establish relationships between the commuter railroads and Amtrak, all of whom share use of the Northeast Corridor. and have the sharing of costs done based on actual use. That's not rocket science, but apparently there are many states between Washington and Boston that share less than what they actually use, whereas Long Island Railroad and Metro-North over the years have fashioned agreements based on actual use. In the case of Metro-North is paid by Amtrak because Amtrak is using the Metro-North line, the New Haven line in New York. And Long Island Railroad pays Amtrak because Long Island Railroad is using a section of the Northeast Corridor that extends from Sunnyside Yard, Harold Interlocking for several miles into Penn Station. All of those agreements have been based on actual use. Some refinements have been required, but as you can see in the staff summary, the net result is modest. That is to say, overall, between the additional funds that Amtrak will pay to Metro-North and the slightly additional funds that Long Island will pay to Amtrak actually net out in favor of MTA.
Bill, when you say actual use, are you referring to
Trains.
the mileage or the number of trains that are actually running over their tracks?
The primary metric is train moves.
So it is okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
But I just want to point out, again, up and down the corridor, there are some states which have been making great use of the corridor, but spending a lot, paying Amtrak a lot less than what it's actually based on use. So some of the swings in states like Pennsylvania and New Jersey are significant in favor of Amtrak. That is to say, those states will spend much more. The other thing that's sort of interesting about the Act is that it's the federal government each year funds a certain amount to Amtrak. It's based on appropriation. Many argue that it should be greater. The first step toward possibly adjusting the funds to Amtrak was for the federal government to say, well, the Northeast Corridor is an asset. It's mostly owned by Amtrak. Let's collect more funds from the states that make more use of the Northeast Corridor that don't pay on use today. We'd like to go the next step, and as members of the Commission, and we've been urging the feds to now say, all right, now that things have been balanced and payments are actually being made on use, the federal government needs to step up for the significant backlog of state of good repair that exists all up and down the corridor. And it affects us, things like the East River tunnels, the Hudson River tunnels, the movable bridges in Connecticut, and then many more significant investment needs like the Susquehanna Bridge in Maryland and Delaware and the Baltimore Tunnel. So in the end, it's sort of a truing up based on actual use. As you can see, there's the numbers aren't large, and we're recommending that the board, first the Finance Committee, and then the board endorse these agreements, endorse the modifications to the existing agreements.
Mr. Pally.
Mitch?
So in reality, this is paperwork. It has no effect on our ability to do anything in the East River tunnels, our ability to do anything anywhere with the various impediments that we have been faced with by Amtrak. All this does is basically change the numbers in that regard. It does not change operations, it does not change maintenance, it does not change responsibilities, it doesn't change any of those, many of which we would like to change.
Yes, yes. Yes, it doesn't do that. It's just simply a truing up based on actual use of the corridor.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. There's been a motion and a second. Ready for a vote? All in favor? Opposed? Abstain? Motion carries. Second staff summary is a public hearing on the New Haven line Connecticut fare increase.
Yeah. So we have an action item concerning the proposed Connecticut fare increase. Specifically, the action is to approve MTA and Metro-North's participation in the public hearing process in connection with a fare increase proposed by the Connecticut Department of Transportation, CDOT. The proposed increase only affects travel between New York and Connecticut stations and travel between Connecticut stations. Fares within New York State are not affected. Connecticut's proposal is to raise fares 6% effective sometime after December 1st and is needed to help CDOT fill a projected budget gap. This includes a previously approved 1% increase that is scheduled to go into effect on January 1st. Under the service agreement between MTA and the Connecticut Department of Transportation, both MTA and CDOT must approve all New Haven line fare increases. As per past practice, we fulfill public hearing requirements by taking part in CDOT's public hearings in Connecticut. CDOT is also proposing to raise branch line fares, but this does not require MTA approval. Following hearings and a public comment period, any fare increase would come back to the board for final approval. We need a motion.
Is there a motion? And a second.
Well, there was one scheduled for January 1st of 1%. In the language, it would be sometime after December 1st, so presumably sometime in December.
Anyone else? All in favor? Opposed? Abstain? Motion carries. I believe.
Angel Barbosa is here to take us through the procurements.
Thank you, Doug. Good morning. So for headquarters, there are 5 competitive procurements for a grand total of $67.200 million. Excuse me, $67.199,938 million. There are 3 actual items that I'll speak to briefly. The staff summaries are in your finance book on pages 35 to 45. The first item is to recommend that the board approve a memorandum of understanding with the Office of Information Technology of New York State for data center co-location for a period of 60 months from August 1st, 2016 through July 31st, 2021 at a not to exceed amount of $1.5 million, which includes a contingency of $20,000. The second item is an all-agency enterprise asset management. This is a recommendation that the board approve the award of 12 $0 competitively negotiated all-agency software integration contracts to support and implement the next stage of MTA's enterprise asset management program on an as-needed basis for a period of 5 years with 2 additional one-year options from August 1st, 2016 through July 31st, 2021, and the not to exceed amount of $50 million. And the third item is for the Small Business Development Program, to recommend that the board approve the award to TDX Construction Corporation to provide mentoring services for the MTA Small Business Mentoring Program for a 4-year period from August 1st, for the MTA Small Business, August 1st, 2016 through July 31st, 2020, with options to renew for 2 additional 1-year periods at the MTA's sole discretion at a not to exceed cost of $10.7 million for the initial 4 years. Those are the items for our headquarters.
May I have a motion and then a second? Any questions or comments on these items? Ms. Vanterpool.
Mr. Barbosa, hi. For the ITS relocation, does that amount include the cost of the actual relocation? I understand there's no personnel involved with this, but are those costs factored into the $1.5 million?
Yes.
Okay.
And actually, our CIO is here, said if there's any other questions on that particular, but yes.
Thank you.
Anything else? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstain? The items carry.
Next on the agenda, we have Metro North. There are 2 competitive procurements for Metro North. The first is a modification to an existing agreement for additional funds and a 22-month time extension for $1 million. In addition, Metro North is seeking board approval to use the RFP process in a joint procurement with the Long Island Railroad. Chairman.
Is there a motion and second? Any questions or comments on these procurements? Hearing none. All in favor? Opposed? Abstaining? The procurements carry.
For Long Island Railroad, there are two procurements. One is a non-competitive sole source procurement for $108,000, and one is a request to use the RFP process, amount TBD.
May I have a motion and a second? Are there any questions or comments on these procurements? Hearing none, all in favor? Opposed? Abstaining? The procurements carry.
For New York City Transit and MTA bus operations, there is one non-competitive procurement for a 4-year extension modification for a grand total of $2.3 million.
Motion and second on this procurement? Are there any questions or comments? All in favor? Opposed? Abstaining? This procurement carries. And finally,
There are no items for bridges and tunnels, and there are no items for FinTech. Thank you.
thank you.
For your information, MTA consolidated financial and operational reports can be found on pages 56 to 109. And next is real estate with Jeff Rosen.
Thanks, Doug. So, good afternoon. We have 4 action items for your consideration this month, each the subject of a staff summary in the real estate section of the book. Unless there are any questions, I would ask for your approval.
Is there may I have a motion and second first, and then questions and comments? Mr. Merdler.
Jeff, is there anything that can be done as part of the leasing process where you have a food service at the subway station to in any way limit the possibility of stuff getting into the trains, onto the tracks and the like? In other words, something that can be done to require them to keep it clean.
Well, we have quite limited food and beverage service offerings in the subway, precisely because that has historically been a concern. Where we have introduced food, as for example at Columbus Circle, we've worked hard with transit to establish standards for hygiene. For instance, at that location, there's a quite elaborate, fully enclosed trash compactor operation and so on.
I saw it on Friday, and the only comment I would make about that facility is the lighting could be significantly improved, the Turnstile Mall.
Mr. Merdler, could you please speak more clearly into the
I'm sorry. My concern is, on these kind of places going forward, could we take a look as to whether anything can be done? And the answer may be nothing can be done to stop the food stuff that winds up on the tracks and causes the fires.
As I say, we try to deal with that at the source. To the extent that people are taking food with them and taking it onto the subway, of course, it's hard to prevent them from doing that, regardless of where they bought it. But our first line of defense is to have adequate disposal facilities at the location.
One question?
Yes,
Jeff,
Mr.
in the Columbus Circle station closures because of the turnstile development, do you plan to put up signs in advance of the closure letting passengers know that this is happening as of a certain date?
Well, certainly, but the first order of business is an information item because it's merely an authorization to proceed with a public hearing. So there will be, community outreach over the summer, and then absolutely there would be, notice. But I should say that in no case will anyone. This is only in the middle of the night, and in no case will anyone have to walk any additional distance. It's a straight shot down the street to the next stairway.
Thanks.
Anyone else? There's a motion and a second. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstaining? The item carries. Are there any information items, Mr. Rosen?
We do have information items in the book, one of which was mentioned. We have our annual Grand Central retail report. Normally, Nancy Marshall is here to speak to highlights. She unfortunately had a death in the family, so she isn't here. I'd be glad to take any questions about the report, and the headline is that our tenants continue to experience strong sales, and we are seeing, on renewals, we're seeing new rents that are significantly in excess of the rents that we were getting, even taking into account the percentage rent we were getting under old leases. And as I said at Metro North this morning, I think that's a testament to the attractiveness of the facility generally and the retail there specifically, as people are paying a premium to be there.
If there are no further questions or comments, I'm going to ask for a motion for the Finance Committee to convene in executive session. Have a motion? Second. All in favor? Aye. We'll be going into executive session.